pleased. This meeting is being recorded, if anyone else got that message. Before we go on to our very special guest speaker, I'm so happy to introduce the wonderful team at Voices of Moncrief who have pulled together tonight's event. And as you all would probably know, have been doing so much work, volunteer work, and work behind the scenes in terms of bringing the community together. So really pleased to introduce you to Laura Snell to say a few words about what you guys have been up to and what you're planning on doing into the future.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. And welcome, everyone. So great to see so many of you here. Most of you may have met me, but some won't have. So yeah, I'm part of the Voices of Moncrief group here on the Gold Coast, and we are a group that came together really just to listen to people and caring about people, our community being heard, and obviously about concerns also being acted upon. So we want to see genuine representation for our part of the Gold Coast and in Parliament, and really want to make sure that our politicians are held accountable to our community. So the past 6 months, we have done a whole range of kitchen table conversations. We've got an online survey that's online right now as well. And tonight's event is also about part of that listening process. And one of the things that does come up quite regularly is the whole area around intergenerational equity, and also what climate change will mean and how it's going to impact future generations. So that's what tonight's about, trying to tackle and listen and learn about that topic that obviously is of great concern in our community here on the Gold Coast. So we also know that our Member of Parliament here for Moncrief is the Shadow Minister for Youth. So really this should be a key topic on the agenda now and going forward. Also personally, I'm a mother of 3 boys, and obviously have concern for how the future they're going to grow up into. So I'm really grateful for you, Anjali, to be here tonight, so we can learn more about your journey and how we can support the legislation. So yeah, thank you all for being here. Back to you, Nicole.
Thanks so much, Laura, and thanks for those thoughts and all the terrific work that you've been doing. I'm so pleased that we have an incredible speaker with us tonight, and that's Anjali Sharma. So Anjali is a leading Australian climate activist, has been since age 16. She spearheaded the landmark lawsuit Sharma versus the Minister for the Environment in 2021, pushing for governmental duty in considering future climate impacts. Her influential activism has led to the proposal of the Duty of Care Bill, emphasising children's wellbeing in climate decisions, showcasing individual power in holding governments accountable for climate change. I watched the incredible Australian Story that you were involved in just recently, and I think it would be amazing to hear from you, Anjali, about if we go back a little bit to the beginning and back to 2021, and you can tell us about your kind of journey so far. I'm really mindful that sometimes we'll say things like people do incredible things for their age or what you've achieved for their age, but quite simply, it's got nothing to do with age. What you've achieved is incredible by any mark and by any stretch. So well done on that great work, and over to you to tell us a little bit about back to the beginning.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicole. That means a lot. And it's so lovely to see so many people on this webinar tonight. As one of the 4 people in the Duty of Care team, we've been trying to do as many of these little conversations as possible and really talk to communities who already have, an awareness of climate change and awareness of the need for climate action, and really fill them in on the Duty of Care bill, because sometimes, especially as a young person, I've realized that there is a real disconnect between what happens in Parliament and what people know about what's happening in Parliament. So trying to bridge that gap, trying to make sure that as many people are aware of this proposal as possible, and trying to change that into support for the duty of care bill, and show our politicians that people, once they understand it, they do really, really support the principle. So just by way of introduction, my name is Anjali Sharma. I study in Canberra, but my home is Melbourne, so that's where I am currently right now, on uni break. And I'm just 20 years old, just turned 20. And yeah, I'm one of the 4 people in the Duty of Care team who is working and leading the advocacy campaign behind Senator David Pocock's Duty of Care bill. So I'll take you through how that came to be. I'll take you through what the bill actually is, what the process is, and of course, what you can do if you agree with the idea and you want to support it. And yeah, I guess we'll get to all of that in much greater depth. I just have some slides that I will share now. I hope you can see that. Let me know if you can't. But yeah, I guess I'll just take you through it. Feel free to pop any questions in the chat, or yeah, we'll get to questions at the end. But yeah, I guess I'll just start. Thank you so much again to Nicole, Laura, and Karen for inviting me to do this briefing. And yeah, really keen to run you through it all. So as Nicole said, this campaign kind of originated with the court case of Sharma and Minister for the Environment. So that was a class action of 8 children who are pictured here. And we took the Australian government to court, arguing that the federal environment minister, who was at that time Susan Lee, owed and was breaching a duty of care to young people to protect us from the impacts of climate change. So I was really, really lucky to be able to lead that court case, and we were represented by an amazing law firm with pro bono lawyers. And all 8 of us had our own stories as to why climate change matters to us. So for me, I was born in India, and even though I moved to Australia at a very, very young age, I've seen a lot of my family grow up in a place that goes through constant floods and fires and heat waves. And unlike us on the other side of the world, has very, very limited resources and money to rebuild after climate disaster or to safeguard themselves before the next climate disaster. So that's the reality of climate change that I've really seen in my life, and that's why this issue matters so much to me. I took the Australian government to court alongside one of my really amazing friends, Lou, who lost her house in the bushfires of 2019 and 2020. And so all of us really had a tangible experience with climate change, which drew us to that court case. On first instance, we won, which was just groundbreaking, and it was novel, and I don't think anybody had really expected that to happen, not at all, even the lawyers running the case, because the case law was really, really novel, and it was really significant, and it was a common law duty of care, and nothing like it had ever been recognised. But the court found that this duty did exist in Australian law. Unfortunately, this duty happened to exist for all of 3 months before the federal environment minister then used taxpayer money to take us 8 young people back to court and appeal the existence of this duty of care. So we went back to court, and before the full bench of the federal court, so essentially a higher court, we argued our case again, and on that point, we lost. But what's really, really interesting about that decision is that we didn't lose on the basis that this duty of care didn't exist. We lost on the basis that the court didn't think that if this duty of care existed, that it was their job to impose it, but that if it did exist, it was a job of Parliament to put it in place instead. So that essentially ended up functioning for us as a mandate to then take this fight onto Parliament, out of the courts and into Parliament House, and argue that if the court had essentially shifted the responsibility over to them, then it was now their turn to take this up and run with it. So that has led on to this political campaign where after around a year of research and reaching out to lawyers, to policy experts about the possibility of this legislation, what it could look like, the function, the scope, I approached politicians, and at this point I was about to move to Canberra to start studying, so I reached out to my senator, David Pocock, And his team and he took it on board, and it took about 6 months to draft this bill until it was tabled in Parliament in July of last year. So the actual bill, you can go through and read it on the Parliament website. I wouldn't recommend it. It's quite wordy. It's in legalese, and I study law and I can't get my head around it. But in basic terms, right now there is no clear obligation in Australia's legislation for ministers and other government decision makers to take into account the potential impacts of the climate crisis on the health or well-being of young people, either now or into the future. So we see that as a very, very clear policy gap and a failing of legislation so far. But this proposed law would change that. It amends the Climate Change Act to add 2 statutory duties. It would create a new duty for decision makers to consider the health and well-being of current and future children in Australia when they are making decisions that could worsen the climate crisis. For example, decisions to approve new coal mines or to use public money to fund new fossil fuel infrastructure. And it would prohibit decisions that would support more fossil fuel mining or exploration, or which would lead to levels of greenhouse gas emissions that would pose a real risk of harm to children's health and well-being. And we really see this as a law that promotes intergenerational equity in government decision making, whereas something that I have seen, I think a lot of you might agree with me on this, is that government decision making tends to be really short term. And when we see a government instated into office, we see that their priorities immediately become how they can get back into office in the next 3 years when voters once again go to the ballot box. That sort of short-term view is really good for a government and its election cycle, but not as good for young people who really need a long-term view on policy. And that's what this bill aims to implement. Because the aim of the proposed law is to help make sure that when the Australian government makes decisions which could worsen the climate crisis, that it is required to consider that the impacts of worsening climate change on future generations of Australians. So there are 6 acts that this bill would apply to. The most relevant is the EPBC Act, which has been in the news quite a lot recently. It's the one under which most fossil fuel approvals are made. So the decision to approve a fossil fuel project under the EPBC Act, including a new coal development or a new gas development, could be subject to this duty of care, as could any decision to approve offshore gas or oil or fossil fuel project, or any decision to use public funding to or loan or make public loans to infrastructure projects. For example, funding to fossil fuel companies for gas industry infrastructure in the Northern Territory. So the bill is currently before the Senate Committee for Environment and Communications. And these are all the processes it's gone through. It has gone through a submissions process, which I'll talk about in a second. It's had oral hearings. We're expecting the report of the committee this time next week. And then after the report, the bill will be brought on for debate, likely in September or October of this year. So submissions. The bill went through around a 3-month-long submission process and received 400 submissions to the Senate inquiry. Now that compared to other bills that come before this inquiry usually receive 20 to 30 submissions. So that was an incredible level of public engagement that we were just so heartened by. And these submissions were from every sector of the public. We had climate NGOs and human rights NGOs, and then we had really random ones that nobody saw coming, like Ben and Jerry's, who were very in support of the bill, making me love them even more if that was possible. And there was only in the 400 submissions one that was openly against the bill, and that was the Institute of Public Affairs, which has Gina Reinhart as an honorary member of their board, so very expected. But yeah, I think that spelled the level of public support for this bill, which we were really encouraged to see. We also have been trying to empower young people to write to their MPs and to really take a stand for their own futures in the way that they can. And so Parents of Climate Action especially has helped us roll out these campaigns to young people. And here's a a little cross section of pictures and letters that children have drawn and written and sent to their politicians, which are very, very wholesome and yeah, just really lovely to see. Another way that we've tried to inspire young people is by actually bringing them to Parliament so that they can meet with their MPs and other MPs and speak about the Duty of Care Bill. So in November last year, we ran this advocacy day where we brought 26 young people from around Australia to Parliament, and we had around 41 MPs meet with us. We did a lot of inside track work within the Labor Party, as well as meeting with members of the opposition and the crossbench. And we were quite heartened by the support we received especially from certain government MPs, which was something that we weren't really expecting. We took around a pledge, which you can see in some of these pictures. It's the blue piece of paper that all of these MPs are holding. And the pledge said, "I support a duty of care." And it to date has been signed by around 35 politicians, with 11 of them being from the Labor Party. Most notably, someone who has signed this is Jed Carney, the Assistant Minister for Health. So having an Assistant Minister on board is very, very heartening, as is having any number of members from within the government. So it's really nice to know that we have a kind of a group from within the government who is also fighting for this bill to be put into place. That being said, though, we did hear a lot of opposition. Most notably, we heard that the government is doing enough on climate change. Now, we're really, really heartened by what we've seen this government do in comparison to the former government, but we know that there is a policy gap where the rights and needs of young people aren't actually reflected in legislation, and we see that as something where it is imperative that that be fixed. There's also been a Senate inquiry there was also the oral hearings of the Senate inquiry, which brought together expert panels from around the country from all different sectors to give evidence into the Duty of Care Bill. Now, that included an expert panel of lawyers who spoke to the legal practicalities of the bill, an expert panel of health workers who spoke to the health effects of climate change, of technology, who spoke to the ways that we can increase our renewable energy capacity and production. And really all these people who spoke really, really strongly in favour of the Duty of Care Bill directly to the Senate committee. And we've also had media, as Nicole mentioned, there was the Australian story that really spelled out the entire, I guess, story of the Duty of Care Bill. We've had op-eds and general media coverage from podcasts and newspapers about the campaign, which has really helped raise their profile. So our kind of general asks for the Duty of Care Bill is firstly to sign the petition. We make sure to state our petition numbers very, very strongly in every meeting that we have, because to get around 15,000 people to be able to actually put their name to a tangible piece of legislation really, really demonstrates that this bill has been embraced by a lot of society. And that's exactly what the government wants to hear, because we know that the government will act on what they think that most of the population wants to see put in place, because that's the point of a democracy. That's what gets them back into Parliament. So that's why we've seen the petition as a really, really clear vehicle for demonstrating how people can help make change. And to write a letter to your MP, I'll run you through a few tips about how to do that. And then to get involved in whatever form makes sense to you. And I guess Voices of Moncrief is a great way to do that, as we saw the amazing impact that Voices of groups had at the previous election. So to include into a letter to Angie Bell, so to first talk about why you care. I found this really, really helpful to talk about in meetings too with politicians, telling them about my story with my family in India. Tell your personal story about climate change and why this issue matters to you so much so that you are spending time when you could be doing literally anything else, writing a letter to politicians, to your MP about something that matters to you so strongly. And yeah, frame the climate crisis as something that is personal to you. And then what are your views on the bill? Why do we need legislation that specifically protects young people in the face of climate change? I always really like to state that there is a wealth of scientific evidence that shows that young people will be worst hit by climate change. And if we know that, then we have to have that reflected in legislation so that we can make sure that government decision making really reflects that knowledge. This is where you can bring in the fact that Angie Bell is the Shadow Minister for Youth. Now, naturally, the opposition, which Angie Bell is part of, hasn't been overly embracing of the bill, but this is very squarely within your MP's portfolio. And being the Shadow Minister for Youth, the entire point of that portfolio is to ensure that that government decision making has an intergenerational perspective. And this is exactly what any Minister for Youth should be embracing rather than rejecting. And I think that's a very, very strong case to be made. And yeah, anything else that the government might want to hear? I think that we know that the government is very threatened by independent campaigns, and that all polling shows that they're heading now for minority government. So that's a very strong point to make. And then end your letter off with a really strong call to support the bill. These are some key points that I've kind of made throughout my entire speech. And yeah, it's really important that you take them and put them in your own words, so that they come across as hard-hitting as they can, and really make sure that Angie Bell listens. And then email it to her. You can find her details on the Parliament House website, or just, Google her name, and yeah, you won't be too far from it. And yeah, over the past few years, we've just heard so much rhetoric around the disengagement of young people in politics, about our apathy and our despair for what our future holds. Obviously, these feelings are powerful and often they're completely justified. But to me, anxiety and despair doesn't solve anything, and nor does giving up on our future. We know that we need leaders like everyone on this call who are willing to take concrete action and to speak up in the face of injustice, in the face of issues such as climate change. And so we're really, really proud to be doing the work for the Duty of Care Bill, as I'm sure many of you are proud to be part of Voices of Moncrief, which could have an amazing impact at the upcoming election. But our work couldn't be done without people like you who are willing to amplify the call, to sign our petition, and to write to your MPs. So I hope these tips have been helpful. We also have more resources on our website, and my email is just on the screen right now if you would like to chuck me an email to talk about anything at any point. But yeah, that's kind of my little spiel. I hope I haven't bored you overly, but I'm happy to take any questions now.
And thanks so much, Anjali. Like, that was just such a good presentation, and you're doing such incredible work. And I think throwing it out to everyone, if you have any questions, and I know that there's parents and young people here as well. I'm certainly interested in. Do you think that? I mean, we see in Parliament a lot of older people, or older relative to your generation, kind of making decisions. In terms of this, in terms of climate, do you think that most young people think like you? Is it a majority? And
Yeah, well, I think one thing that is very, very, like a key characteristic of our generation is the access that we have to news and information. At one tap of our finger, we can see the news from around the world, and that has opened a lot of people's eyes to the reality of the climate crisis. With news being so accessible, we know that the scale of climate disaster is unprecedented and honestly quite frequent, quite severe around the world. That is something that is common knowledge, I think, especially with the education that so many of us are so privileged to have. And so I think that by and large, a very, there is a consensus that climate change is a very real thing and will shape our futures intrinsically. Naturally, we're not homogenous, and young people will differ on how we can mitigate climate change and how to kind of go about that as most of society does. But I think that in generalistic terms, I think we're quite progressive on the issue and very aware of what it means for our futures.
And like, it must be at times really frustrating to be obviously speaking on behalf of your peers and in many ways your generation, and to have your point of view dismissed. How do you feel about that, and how do you keep going and overcome those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you've put so many years of your life, like for me, this is now my 4th year of campaigning for a duty of care. Now obviously in Parliament rather than courts, but this has been a very formative part of my life. Obviously any setback can be quite disheartening. But I think the thing that really keeps me going on the worst days is seeing how many, especially young people, have come to the table on this. One really amazing experience I had recently was there's this girl who I used to be really, really good friends with when we did school strike for climate together. We both helped organize the strikes back in 2019, which brought so many young people to the streets calling for greater climate action. And after that, I saw her get really kind of disoriented with the state of politics. Obviously, at that point, we were still under a Morrison government, and we'd gotten very limited engagement with our actual demands, even though we saw so much success with the climate strikes. And she essentially switched off from climate activism altogether. She focused very squarely for a few years on her study, on her life, as she very much has a right to. But I think that really came out of a sense of disillusionment and despair rather than anything else. And she came back to the table on this duty of care bill, and she was part of that advocacy day. After the advocacy day, we just finished our 41 meetings and we were walking through the halls of Parliament, and she came up to me and she said, thank you. This is the first thing in so many years that has given me hope. And she broke down crying, and she was, telling me about how she's just felt so disoriented for so many years. But, this is one thing that has finally given her a reason to get back into campaigning and talk to MPs again. So seeing young people who have embraced this concept, who have found just a channel in which to funnel their anger, their despair, their worry about the climate crisis, that's what makes sure that no setback is too great for this campaign to not keep going.
That's you've spoke so well on that, and really great points. And obviously over to the floor, if anyone has any questions, throw your hand, or if you want to put the question in the chat, I can ask it for you. It's really it's not lost on me, and it was certainly no accident that you were already leading the student protests back in 2000, and probably it was 17, 18, 19, that you were already kind of stepping into a leadership role in that space. And then, you continuing to go strength to strength. Do you find is it hard to have that pressure to be the face of? And
I think that I have never felt like the face of, because I've always been so grateful to do what I've done with an incredibly strong and capable team. When I was in 2021, I emceed the climate strikes in Melbourne, but I did that alongside one of my very, very amazing climate friends who went on to represent Australia at the youth delegation of COP that year. So yeah, she's fabulous. And now even with the duty of care team, I do it alongside 3 of my amazing friends who are, so well spoken, so knowledgeable in their own right. And sometimes we walk into these meetings with MPs, and some MP will be saying something that I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I have no idea how to respond to this. There's just, they've got me. I'm just going to throw my hands up and walk out. But one of them pulls out a rebuttal out of, thin air, and, they've nailed it, and I'm just, in awe. I've always been so lucky to work with an incredible team, and so I've never felt that pressure, because they've always known that when when life inevitably happens, there's always someone there to pick up the load, which is amazing to kind of have that.
Yeah. And so when we think about the kind of what's next for you, or how do you think this bill will go? I know we all know what we need to do, and we need to hurry up and do it, which is signing and writing our letters. How do you think it's going to go? And then what are the next steps?
I think that firstly, the duty of care is a very, very digestible concept. Duties of care are owed at all levels of society, a doctor to their patients, a teacher to their students, and so it's a really, really hard thing to reject on moral grounds. The optics of the former government going to court to argue that they didn't have a duty of care, well, they were crucified for that, quite rightly, I think. And so now for the current government, if they wish to reject this duty of care bill, they'll be seen firstly to be rejecting a duty of care, which is, everyone knows what that is. And I think it's quite morally incomprehensible to reject that. And they'll also be seen to be siding with the former government, which I know they don't want, and nobody wants to see that. And so I think that they're kind of backed into a corner here. Not to say that they won't find a way to wriggle out. We know that on small issues they always can. But we also know that that gives us really, really good grounds on which to criticize if they don't wish to engage with this bill, which we hope that they do. We do kind of hope, though, that if they reject this bill, that they come back to us with some other kind of proposal, maybe their own form of a duty of care and their own legislation in their own words. And, if they do that, then obviously we'll engage with that however we can. But so far, this campaign has seen a lot of success, I think, in engaging with the government, in bringing people on board. And yeah, we'll just hope to, I guess, pursue that as much as we can.
Mm. And well done for getting a seat at the table. Wayne, do you want to say your question out loud? Or no, okay. So I guess we're just sort of wanting to address, if these things are successful, and some of these changes we're proposing, they're on a really individual scale in terms of what might be achieved. And when we're talking about a major global issue, do you think it can have an impact on a small scale, or what are the big things?
Yeah, well, that's actually one of the biggest concerns that the government, I think, has said that they hold with this bill, which is that it's really, really hard to quantify, obviously, the impacts of a single fossil fuel project on the great, massive, big issue of climate change as a whole. And yeah, we know that. We know that 50 years down the line, if we're living in a world that is horribly affected by climate change, we won't be able to look back in time and, point to that one fossil fuel project and say, that's the one that stopped us up forever. We know that that's just not the reality. But we also know that that can't be a reason to put legislation like this in the too hard basket. And that's what we've been saying to any politician who kind of brings that up. Now, we do also know that the EPBC Act, as Wayne said, hasn't necessarily been overly fit for purpose, despite having these biodiversity triggers, these other triggers. And we have sought to rectify that with the duty of care bill, by giving it a very strict application. So just in high level terms, the duty of care will apply to any decision that is predicted over its lifetime to emit over 100,000 tons of carbon dioxide, that will automatically be subject to a duty of care. And then the relevant decision maker, who will likely be the environment minister, will have to go through a framework to decide whether that decision will have a tangible risk on the health and well-being of young people. Now, obviously, for that to be figured out, we'll need some sort of a framework by which to assess the health and well-being of young people. But the good thing is that the Australian Human Rights Commission and child rights organizations have actually been working on that for a long time. And we've seen the National Children's Commissioner just last year come out with a draft framework which assesses the risk of fossil fuel projects on the health and well-being of young people. So we know that it's not we know that it is doable. It's just about whether we now have the ambition to do it. None of this is too hard, and the arguments that are being put out against it have been used for many, many years. But we know that we can now assess the impacts of single coal mines, of single gas projects on harm to young children. It's just if we want to take that novel step and start doing that, because that level of scrutiny could mean that a lot of coal, oil, and gas projects aren't allowed to go ahead. And it's just about whether we have the ambition to do that.
And thanks so much. That's a really good answer. And if anyone else has any questions, the time is nigh. What does a typical day look like for you?
Well, it's very, very different every day. Well, I guess I'm a uni student, so my typical day is in Canberra in uni. I wake up, it's naturally freezing, but luckily I'm very lucky in my student accommodation that my heating is included in my rent. So I don't have to be overly conscious of how often I use my heating because I don't get hit with a massive gas bill every month. I'm very lucky for that. So it will be toasty most likely in my room. But yeah, my kind of coping mechanism for everything is exercise. So I usually I'll go on a nice run or I'll go to the gym before uni, head to my classes. In the middle, I love to have lunch on campus. There are some amazing lunch spots at the ANU campus. Finish up uni, come home, and then I'll probably get to work on duty of care stuff, send a few emails, maybe have a meeting. That's all usually late afternoon stuff alongside a nice cup of hot chocolate or, I'm very into some nice salted crackers or an orange. That's my favorite fruit. And yeah, get that done. Maybe watch an episode or two of Netflix. I have just finished Bridgerton, so I was quite happy with that, and now I'm looking for something else to watch. Cook some dinner, and then I'm actually an early bird, so I'm usually in bed by 9, asleep by 9:30. Which, yeah, I get a lot of looks whenever I say that, but that I can't function honestly past 10. Even during exam season, my kind of policy is if I don't know it by 9, I don't know it at all. So yeah, that's kind of a day in my life.
Thanks for sharing. And just on that, what are your thoughts around intergenerational equity? And you were just talking then about your typical day, and you've got housing, and if your heating's on, and the cost of living, and a HECS debt, and all of those things. What are your thoughts around this space, and how can we get better, and what does the future look like?
Can you repeat that? Sorry, I was reading the chat and I just zoned out.
That's okay. I was just interested in your thoughts on that Laura was mentioning as well around intergenerational equity more broadly in terms of your generation. I was just picking up a few threads of your day where there's the heating bills, there's the housing, there's the undoubtedly a HECS debt. And I'm sure your generation are looking at the housing market. And of course, you didn't have smashed avocado on toast at a cafe because that's not what young people do. What do you think about the situation, and what can we do better, and how will the future unfold?
Well, yeah, I touched on kind of that difference between short-term decision making and long-term decision making. And unfortunately, I think a lot of those issues are to do with short-term electoral cycles and the fact that, who the government is looking to please with its policies is usually not the 15, 16-year-olds who then will have to cope with the horribly stuffed up housing market 10, 15 years down the line, because that they're not the demographic that the government will be seeking to get votes from come the next election. So I think that looking and having a long-term view on decision making is very, very crucial to solving a lot of those problems. And unfortunately, that's where kind of ambition really comes into play. And for that, a key factor that we really, really need is the crossbench, which is why it's such a good thing that groups like Voices of Moncrief exist. Because if you talking about the HEC stat, we've just recently seen Monique Ryan and her campaign for the HEC stat be so successful in getting $3 billion worth of HEC stat cancelled. We've seen the crossbench be so strong on housing, on HECs, on mental health, and all of these issues that are being seen now to disproportionately impact young people. And so I think it's bringing politics back to that community level, and ensuring that policy isn't just tailored to political donors or lobbyists, but really communities, which will ensure that these problems get tackled.
Great answer. And I'll just ask a question on behalf of Murray. He said young people are warming to the idea of Dutton's nuclear distraction. And I'm not sure, are they? And if they are, what do we do to convince younger people it's not the way to go, if it's not the way to go? I was talking to Laura about this the other day, and reflecting on the 90s and watching The Simpsons with Homer Simpson going off to work in the nuclear power plant was quite a long time ago. We weren't having the conversation then. So what do you think about it now?
Yeah, I think that nuclear isn't something I saw a lot of young people talking about years ago, but definitely something that's come into a little bit more of the political sphere recently, especially with Dutton's kind of nuclear agenda. Um, and what I feel like in my circles, I haven't seen that much of an embracing of nuclear power. But that being said, there are some now very clear youth voices that are also calling for nuclear power alongside Dutton, which is, slightly disheartening. Given that we know that firstly, nuclear power is 1.5 times more expensive than renewables, that Dutton has said the first nuclear power plants will be online by 2035, when, we can't delay transitioning to a low carbon economy until 2035. The issues around nuclear waste, around the feasibility, around the danger of nuclear reactors. I think that there are very, very clear points to be made against nuclear power. And unfortunately, the proponents of nuclear power are proponents of nuclear power because they are against renewable energy for whatever reason that may be. And so I think that the messaging against nuclear power actually writes itself. I think it's very clear, and it's just about communicating that nuclear power is dangerous, it's slow, it's inexpensive, and it's expensive, and it's not what we need.
Really great points there. Thank you so much. I reckon we are probably pretty well done, unless anyone
There's
has
one question above there from Leah, I think.
Oh,
that we missed.
Leah, I can't see you. Oh, here. Leah, do you, Oh, okay. Leah, are you finding much support from younger generations for the bill? I've been told recently that young people don't have time to get involved in politics.
Yeah, well, I think that there's definitely pockets of young people who kind of have this attitude of, I don't do politics. But, regardless of that, politics will have an effect on your life. And I think that it's very hard to ignore um, that very real truth that whether or not you choose to engage with politics, politics will shape your life. And I think that more and more young people now are starting to come around to that idea, given that there is just all of these compounding issues now that will intrinsically shape the lives of young people. Like, we've touched on HECS, housing, on just all of these intergenerational issues that making sure that we don't prosper and thrive in a way the generations before us have. I think that there's also another very clear blocker to getting young people involved in politics and within the Duty of Care Bill and similar campaigns is that level of kind of disillusionment, where I remember once saying to or kind of saying to someone in my very early school strike days that I was going to the school strike that was to take place the next day. And, her very clear answer was, okay, what good will that do? And that's the kind of attitude that a lot of people have, that there's just no point in engaging in politics because what difference can someone have? So I think that one of the very very imperative ways of getting young people involved in politics is to show them that there is scope to make change. One of the ways that that happened at the 2022 elections was with the amazing success of the independent campaigns. And so many of my friends I know now have interned with politicians in Canberra or have looked to join community-led campaigns because they've seen that they actually can have success. The Duty of Care Bill hopefully has demonstrated substantial success in similar ways, bringing people on board now, as we've seen with the Advocacy Day. And so I think that if that kind of attitude of I don't have time to get involved in politics, the underlying issue usually is I don't think that me putting any time towards politics is going to have any sort of impact. And I think that showing people that they can have an impact and that they need to have an impact because regardless of whether they engage or not, their lives will be changed, is the two kind of ways we work on getting young people involved.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. If anyone else doesn't have any questions, do we have any more questions? I think that might, yeah, thank you. Look, you are just such a wonderful speaker and you're so inspiring and so passionate and clearly whip smart. And it's amazing that the work that you're doing. And I think I speak for all of us that the future is bright with people like you leading our next generation of leaders. So keep going. Keep knowing there are people here that support you on the days that feel hard. I probably speak on behalf of everyone here to say, well done and congratulations. And to everybody that is here, maybe, I don't know if the Voices of Moncrief team want to say anything, but thanks for showing up, for giving up some time, for listening, and no doubt taking an action. It's really terrific. Laura, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, just wanted to say thank you, Anjali, for an amazing presentation. Thanks so much for your time with us tonight, and thanks for everyone to come along. I know it's busy for everyone, busy schedules, but really happy to see you all here, and we'll keep going. Voices of Moncrief, we've got a survey online that we also, for anyone who hasn't done, please jump on board there, and we'll keep having hopefully some more webinars with topics of interest. This has definitely been a big one for us here, and just great to see you all here. So thank you very much. We hope to see you all again online or in real life, and wishing you a great night. Thanks so much.